welcome to my review of Possum. This is a really good film that I really want to talk about. However, the subject matter is incredibly dark, so I'm putting a sensitive content warning for anyone who is not comfortable with topics such as pedophilia, child predators, emotional, sexual, and physical abuse. Please continue at your own discretion. It is such a shame that the subject matter discussed in Possum is so dark, because the way this movie goes about its narrative and developing its characters and showing conflict is so strong and solid, especially within horror, but even as storytelling alone, it is incredibly strong. Which really sucks, because I really want more people to see this movie, but it's really dark, so I get it. I'm gonna put the spoiler warning pretty early in this video because outside of the ending, there's not really a whole lot of plot to this movie. It's much more about the characters, and the main character specifically, Philip, dealing with their trauma. And there's not a whole lot you can spoil about that besides the ending, which I will discuss towards the end of this video, so rest assured you can watch this video and still watch Possum up until I mention I'm going to talk about my theories about the ending and what it means. If you are planning on watching the film right now, go for it. Like, 100%, I love this film. I think most people will enjoy this if they are a casual enjoyer of horror, and are okay with indulging in some experimental filmmaking techniques. However, the biggest thing that I really want to emphasize before you go and watch it is this movie is scary, not because of most traditional heebie-jeebie movies. This movie is scary because while a lot of what you're seeing is abstract, all of it is symbolic, and what you're seeing is symbolic of something that is very, very real. This movie is amazing, and it's amazing because it uses very, very simple storytelling devices in incredibly strong ways. And I remember the puppet really sticking out to me the first time it's introduced, and there's one line that right at the beginning of the film really threw me off and immediately set my goal of the film to figure out what does the puppet mean. And it's this line.
Before you kill it.
Can't kill it as a puppet.
The rest of the movie was me focusing on all the little poems that Philip is reading to us from his book, and all of the moments that the puppet is doing something, or Philip is interacting with the puppet, or Maurice says something alluding to the puppet, or when Maurice uses a puppet, what does it mean? I had a very strong inkling that the puppet was a metaphor for something being perverted from childhood, something that, I don't know, in my mind I was waiting for a scene where he would go through something and find a toy puppet that he played with as a kid, or something, and I was very much looking for that, but what I ended up finding instead was that never happened. The spider was always looked like a spider, and what that led me to the conclusion of was this puppet represents his trauma. He's constantly trying to get rid of the puppet. He's constantly ditching it places, throwing it into like random places, trying to drown it, burn it, do all these things. And no matter what he does, no matter where he throws it, no matter what he does, it always comes back. It's brilliant, it's extremely well executed, and it's so simple. This isn't to take away from the genius of the symbol, but it's so good the way everything is executed. By the way, in terms of the symbolism behind the design of the puppet, there's an incredible video called The Unseen Terror of Possum by Ryan Hollinger? I have no idea how to pronounce her name, I'm sorry, but it's a phenomenal video. I'll link it somewhere, but yeah. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, this is where horror begins to shine. In my opinion, this is one of the greatest depictions of a character's trauma. an ever-pervasive and present force that horrifies the person and is constantly trying to run, and no matter what, it always remains. It always returns. There's nothing that the character can do on his own. And that's pretty accurate. There's nothing you can individually do to combat a traumatic event. Most coping from trauma comes from opening up to people, and the idea that you could just hunker down and power through it just isn't how it works. There are few depictions of trauma in media that have so perfectly captured how consuming a traumatic event can be in a person's life, even into adulthood. For instance, BoJack. That's a phenomenal show that deals a lot with BoJack's trauma and as a child and all the things that his parents did to him growing up. Getting back to horror, and more specifically this movie is the greatest counter-argument for anyone arguing that horror isn't a good genre. This movie so perfectly captures, in my opinion, a very, very delicate balance of horror and story. I believe that there are movies where the story is very much in service of the horror, where the story isn't really there to do anything other than to get blood on the screen. This isn't to say that movies that do this are poorly made, it's just the story suffers as a result. However, the opposite, when the horror is used to enhance the themes of the story, this is where things get really good. This is when horror becomes so much more than just guys running around in rubber masks. This is when horror becomes something transformative for me. This is where I feel the greatest emotion when watching films. This is how I connect a lot, through seeing characters deal with incredibly bad situations and just how they react and all the different ideas and things that it invokes in me. Well, that's all I have to say about the analysis of this film and about the horror in this video. Moving on to my little conspiracy theory about what's actually going on throughout the film. I highly encourage you, if you have not watched this film, please go watch it. Like, don't listen to me. But if you have watched it or you just don't care, Philip, at the beginning of this film, is seen on a train. He's lost his job and he's returning home to somewhere in England, and he has a weird interaction with a 16-year-old boy on the train who is never mentioned by name, but that boy later goes missing, right? Then Philip goes home, and every time he goes to his childhood home where Maurice is, where he doesn't have parents, and so he had to grow up with Maurice, his really weird uncle. They always have really strange interactions, and every time he enters the house, there's a door that he always looks at but never goes through. At the end of the film, Philip finally goes in through that door into that room, where Maurice attacks him and begins to molest him and do all sorts of gross things. But Philip overpowers Maurice, kills him, and then goes to the suitcase at the other end of the room and opens up the suitcase. Here's my theory on what that means. I believe Maurice isn't real. There's several points in the film where he just kind of shows up. You never see him outside of the house. And he's just an incredibly strange presence in the story. I get that was very much purposeful, as he is essentially Philip's trauma as a person instead of a puppet. I believe Maurice is not real. I believe Maurice died, and that he is projecting all of his tendencies that he gained because his uncle was a child predator. And there's several points in the film where Philip is displaying pedophilic tendencies and behaviors. And it's very common for those who are abused by people usually end up growing up to be abusers. And in the context of this story, Maurice becomes an outlet for those urges that he is not proud of. And he kidnapped that boy on the way home, and that's what happened. And I don't know. Again, it's just a theory. Like, it's never explicitly told to us what happened, like when Maurice could have gotten to that boy, because a lot of it is kind of ambiguous, and I don't know. That was my theory. Anyways, that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you watched through till the end, I thank you a lot. It means so much to see numbers and things go up, and to know that people actually care about what I'm saying. So anyways, have a good day, and see you in the next video.